Today on Blue 58, tight ends. The Packers need one at least, and maybe two. Fortunately, there is an abundance of talent at the position in this year's draft. Let's talk about it.
Blue 58!
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Blue 58, the one and only podcast of thepowersweep.com. I am your host, John Meerdink, happy to be with you here for another episode. My love of tight ends is well known. We don't need to belabor that point today. But I just got to say, looking at this tight ends class is pretty great. It's nice. It's like going to a restaurant and looking at the menu and thinking, boy, just about everything here looks good. There is a lot of talent in this year's tight end class and a lot of interesting prospects and a lot of interesting ways that those prospects could be used. And I don't think it's a real secret that the Packers need help at tight end. Marcedes Lewis is still unsigned. Robert Tonyan is a Chicago Bear. Beyond that, you've got Josiah DeGuara and Tyler Davis coming back from last year. Austin Allen hanging around as well, I think still. I haven't checked in on him in a while. Maybe the Packers moved on. I think he's still around. The point is, even if he is, and even if those other guys have pretty solid seasons, the Packers need help at tight end because Josiah DeGuara is not a long-term answer. Tyler Davis is not a long-term answer. And even more to the point, the kind of help the Packers need is the real question, as opposed to whether or not they just need a tight end. Because it's clear that the Packers have a need there, but the kind of help that they need is a more complicated question. Really, they need a blocker and a pass catcher. Now, theoretically, both of those can be the same. Could it be that you get one of those in one person? Yes, but probably no. But theoretically, yes. But even so, you probably need to add at least one guy through the draft and at least one priority undrafted free agent, probably a day 3 pick. Often those blocker and pass catcher roles are two different roles or two different players to begin with. Ideally, you'd be able to use just one guy to fill both of those roles, but really the Packers probably shouldn't hope for that because there just aren't that many of those guys around. When we did our tight end review earlier in this offseason, we talked about guys that we would consider plus to elite blockers. And there just aren't many of those guys around. And the guys that are good, most of them are not like elite pass catchers either. You've got George Kittle, you've got Mark Andrews. I think that was about it as far as the guys that were both elite pass catchers and blockers. And then beyond that, you've really got one or the other. Travis Kelce is obviously an elite receiver. Marcedes Lewis still an elite blocker, but the list starts to get pretty sparse pretty quickly. So really the Packers probably shouldn't hope to just solve all their tight end problems with one guy. They're going to need more than one guy to fill more than one role. And what are those roles really? That's going to be an important part of our discussion here in this episode. What are the roles the Packers are looking to fill? Really, there are 3 major tight end roles. You have the Y tight end, which is really what you think of as a super traditional tight end. The blocker, the guy who lines up in the strong side of the formation and walls off an end or takes care of an outside linebacker. This is Marcedes Lewis. And ideally, if that guy could catch passes too, that would be great because then you don't ever have to bring him off the field. You can run 11 personnel and not really lose much in terms of blocking while still, opening up your formation quite a bit. It would be great if you could get a guy who could do both. The next role is really what I would describe as your weak side tight end, or maybe a big slot, or maybe, to use a more jargony term, a move tight end. This is your Robert Tonyan type guy. The guy who may be on the line, but rarely on the strong side of the formation. Usually if Marcedes Lewis is on the right, Robert Tonyan, if he's on the line, is going to be on the left side. But more often he'll be detached from the formation, usually in the slot. Then you've got your H-back, or in the Shanahan offense, an F, or a quasi-fullback type role. That's your Josiah DeGuaras. Probably the Packers need to add one Y and one move tight end. Ideally, again, you'd get one guy who's good enough as a blocker, but can contribute through the receiving game as well. There are a couple of those sorts of players in this year's class. I would try to throw multiple picks at this position and see what you get from there. Are those guys in the draft? Are there options at each of those positions? I could say pretty confidently, yes. You can find guys who can fill all 3 of those roles. And how are we going to find them? As always, we're going to start with our consensus big draft board. Going to look at the top 200 players in the draft, which of them are tight ends, and then we'll talk about guys that show up in the top 100 pretty extensively. I would also, though we're not going to go super deep on it today, I just want to talk through some of the top options since we don't have just a ton of them in the top 100. Got 6 guys I want to talk through specifically among the top 100 prospects, but I would urge you to go check out Paul Noonan's work at Acme Packing Company with his advanced wide receiver and tight end stats. He's got one that he calls WRAPS, WRAPS. It's a really clever invention. It's a single number that combines, I think, the most important things for both an NFL receiver and a tight end. Athleticism in the form of relative athletic score, catch percentage, and yards per catch. And if you think about it, that's really all you're looking for from a pass catcher. You want athletic guys who catch the ball a lot, that's your catch percentage, and get a lot of yards when they do catch it, either by running after the catch or getting those yards through the air. That's how it works. You want guys who catch the ball a lot and get a lot of yards when they do. It's pretty much that simple for moving the ball down the field. There are really only 3 guys with what Paul would consider elite WRAPS numbers in this class. And we could just say right off the bat, it's Darnell Washington out of Georgia, Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State, with a caveat there, and Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan with another caveat there in terms of, just his overall numbers not being all that. He doesn't have a lot of receiving numbers, quite frankly. But we'll go a little bit deeper into these prospects than just that. We'll also try to mention some blocking scores in here, but I don't think it's something that's necessarily a priority, like a primary skill set for a young tight end. It's kind of like when we talk about, well, I guess we talk about it every year with tight ends. You don't expect young tight ends to necessarily be good to very good blockers. If you get an adequate blocker as a rookie or second-year guy, you're probably in pretty good shape there. Just the physicality of the game is so different from college to the NFL, and honestly, what they're asked to do is going to be so different in the NFL from college that hoping for a lot from a guy as a blocker, as a rookie, is probably foolish, and really projecting that from what he does in college is probably not going to be all that great either. But we will mention some of the blocking grades from Pro Football Focus, just so you have another data point. And really that's what I want to do with tight ends here, is present data points as much as anything else. Like we can talk about the metrics that make guys pretty good. Really, there are just that many good prospects in this year's draft class that I think you could do pretty well with just about anybody you choose. But I think the question is going to be, and I think this is a question that we can answer, what guys could be versus who they are right now based on what they've done in college. That's a kind of a complicated way of saying that, but I think you understand what I'm getting at. We're trying to project guys a little bit based on what they could be. So let's start diving into some of these guys. The first tight end on our list is Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. He's currently 25th on the consensus mock draft big board, 6'4.5", 249 pounds at the combine, though he played in the 260s at Notre Dame. A good athlete, but not a great one. 7.6 relative athletic score, most of that dragged down a little bit by his 4.7 40-yard dash. And if there's any player in this class that hurt himself with his 40-yard dash, it might be Michael Mayer. He probably cost himself 5 or 6 spots of draft slots, I guess, just by running only a 4.7. If he could have even been at like a 4.65, it probably would have made a world of difference for him, because there were some questions about his play speed based on what he did at Notre Dame. Already, he did not alleviate those concerns based on how he ran, even after dropping quite a bit of weight. He is your classic, mainly an inline tight end who will occasionally move out into the slot type guy. His final year at Notre Dame, he played about 62% of his snaps in line. Another 27% were out in the slot. Everything you read about him calls him polished and professional, and his statistical profile, he looks it. His stats are consistent throughout. He got force-fed the football at Notre Dame, always improved his grades year over year, according to Pro Football Focus. And he actually grades really well as a blocker, too. And I know we said that's not a primary skill set, but I do think you have to make a note of it. He's actually the top-rated guy among the tight ends that show up in the top 200 on the consensus mock draft board. Yes, even ahead of Darnell Washington, his final year in college. I know it's not a one-to-one comparison because it seems like their roles are a little bit different, but the grades are the grades. He graded out slightly better, but still better than Darnell Washington. I think if you're looking at Mayer, my big worry would be that he's tapped out. You can say he's polished, but that seems like a positive way to just say he's as good as he's going to get right now. And I think teams do draft guys for who they are right now on occasion, but usually not in the first round, and usually not, at least as far as where the Packers are talked about, taking Mayer 15th overall. I really wonder how close to his ceiling he is already. And if his ceiling really is Jason Witten, like a lot of people seem to suggest, what if he's only 70% of Jason Witten, or 80%, or 85%? What kind of player are you talking about there? It's probably not even into the top half of tight ends in the league, even at the highest end there. That's a pretty... I think that would be a miss if you're only getting a guy who's like the 16th best tight end in the league, if he can't reach every bit of his potential and you're taking him 15th overall. With his athleticism numbers being what they are, especially in the 40, I really got to think you're getting pretty close to his ceiling already, again, especially considering that he dropped weight and still didn't run exceptionally well. However, I'm going to offer the same caveat for Mayer that I'm going to say about just about every tight end in this class. Depending on where you draft him, I think you'd still feel pretty good about adding Mayer to your team. Because although he may be close to the ceiling, where he was in college was pretty good, pretty consistent. And he performed pretty consistently despite, like we said, getting force-fed the football. He was a big part of Notre Dame's offense, and he always seemed to deliver. And I think there is still something to be said for the guy who's just a B+ at everything. Maybe some of those guys end up being like B- players in the NFL, but if you get the right value for that kind of guy, that's a really nice piece to add to your offense. I don't know where he ends up. I really don't have a good read on where any of these guys end up. I think some of the guys that are expected to go pretty high are going to go maybe a round 2 lower, but some guys that are expected to go middle of the second round, I think especially like Darnell Washington, I don't know if there's any ceiling to where he could climb. Like he could go really, really high. In fact, if I put on my just tight end fan hat, you look at a guy like Darnell Washington and you start wondering, his first overall may be too low for a guy like that. Just seems like an otherworldly prospect. Would you spend the first overall pick in next draft if you could? You have to wonder if that even then is too small of an investment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Fun fact about Michael Mayer, he actually had an interception return for a touchdown in high school. A lot of these guys played both ways. That's the body type that you get with a lot of these tight ends, especially as they're growing and just maturing as high school athletes. Mayer was one of those guys, made a difference on both sides of the ball in high school, including a interception return for a touchdown. Dalton Kincaid out of Utah is number 27 on the consensus mock draft board, which makes him our second tight end of the day. He's a little bit smaller than Mayer, though not a whole lot. Just over 6'3.5", 246 pounds. Did not test because he's got had a pretty serious back injury, but he has now been cleared. According to his doctors, he's had no setbacks or anything like that for months and months now. He is good to go, apparently, but we don't have any kind of testing numbers for him because of that injury. I would say he probably projects most as one of those big slot F move type guys. A little over half of his snaps are in line. Another 37% come in the slot. Snaps and slot, don't get those mixed up too much. It starts to sound a little bit weird. Anyway, big slot sort of guy. Another 7% of his snaps split out wide. That seems to be where he is the most comfortable. Kincaid started his career at San Diego, played there for a couple years before finishing up at Utah. Was productive statistically in college. 13.2 yards per catch is nothing to sneeze at. Really seems to be just a big wide receiver. 59.5 blocking grade from Pro Football Focus his final year in college. Again, that's not everything, but I think we should note that is the 5th lowest blocking grade among tight ends on our list today and 2nd lowest among guys in the top 100. I think if you're looking for a receiver, you could do a lot worse. I think if you're looking for a guy to take in the first round, this would be a hard sell for me, especially at 15, because he is not a complete package sort of guy. On top of that, he's also going to be 24 years old as a rookie. If the Packers are starting a rebuild, I think we need to start with guys that have a little bit more runway ahead of them than a guy like Dalton Kincaid, especially considering he already has a pretty major injury on his track record. Fun fact about Kincaid, he did not play football until he was a senior in high school and actually had to transfer to a new school before he even considered it. Somebody said, hey, you might want to think about doing this. He did, ended up getting a scholarship. Now he's talked about as one of the best tight ends in his draft class. Darnell Washington out of Georgia, currently 30th on the consensus mock draft big board. He's a big fella. 6'6" and 5/8, 264 pounds and a whopping 9.88 relative athletic score. That is the second best in the class behind only Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion. 4.64 40-yard dash at 264 pounds. He is a classic inline tight end. 80% of his snaps in his final season at Georgia came in line. This is my guy. Out of the entire draft, this is the guy that I like the most. I'm excited to watch him wherever he ends up in the NFL. I think at the tight end position, if you're looking for the most growth and upside on top of what he is already, that's him. He played a pretty simple role in college. I think he projects as a guy who can add to his game when he's given more responsibility. And if you're going to bet on traits, he has the best traits out of anybody in the draft. All of the other guys who have comparable athletic testing numbers, outside of Luke Schoonmaker, played out at a much less competitive level of college football. They are not in Washington's wheelhouse in terms of or league in terms of the competition they were playing against. He's an athlete who played against other big athletes in the SEC and made them look like children at times. If you're betting on the traits, he's got the traits. He's got them all. I think if you're looking for the most upside at tight end in the class, there's really nobody other than Washington that you should really be thinking about. Fun fact about Washington, played the bass in the orchestra in high school. Big man, plays a big instrument. Kind of like that. Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State is number 48 on the consensus big board right now. Musgrave 6'5", almost 6'6", 253 pounds. Tested pretty well. 4.61 in the 40 leads him to a 9.77 relative athletic score. Similar profile in terms of snaps to Washington in 2021. And we've got to say in 2021 because we have very limited stats on him for 2022 because a still undisclosed knee injury caused him to lose all but 2 games from his final college season. Still don't know exactly what that knee injury is. I think just looking in terms of athleticism, in terms of testing, he's probably got my second favorite profile among guys in this class. Just looks like he can do everything you need him to physically, but he too is a big liability as a blocker. And I know that blocking isn't everything, but compared to a guy like Washington, his blocking grade stands out, 55.9, the lowest or second lowest among the top 100 or tight ends in the top 100. Not great. He is, like we said, a little bit more of an inline guy, though. In 2021, he played nearly 80% of his snaps in line, another 18% in the slot. That is basically take 1% away from what Darnell Washington did, give it to Luke Musgrave, basically the same alignment there. Elite speed for the tight end position. If you're looking for fun facts, at the Senior Bowl, according to the chip monitors that they have in their shoulder pads, Musgrave broke 20 miles per hour running at the Senior Bowl. That is wide receiver speed. He can run, if nothing else. I don't know where you take him. Again, that's the consistent problem with these sort of guys. Number 48 would peg him at a mid-second round pick. Are there going to be 4 tight ends off the board by the middle of the second round? I wouldn't be surprised either way. Could be yes, could be no. If he is the only tight end on the board at 43 and the Packers don't take one in the first round, well, maybe you start thinking about something like that. And 43, I guess, assumes that they're getting something from the New York Jets. But I think you understand what I mean. If the Packers are picking in the middle of the second round and Musgrave is there and they haven't taken anybody yet, you're probably just getting a receiver but you're getting a guy with some pretty freaky athleticism too. Not quite what Washington is because he doesn't quite have the same size, but still, you're not doing too shabby in the athleticism department either. Sam Laporta out of Iowa, number 58 on the consensus mock draft board, is our next tight end up. He is the smallest one of the tight ends in the top 100. 6'3", just over 6'3", 245 pounds, 4.59 40-yard dash, a 9.01 relative athletic score. I'm not sure if he's a Josiah DeGuara type or a Robert Tonyan type, but he definitely isn't the traditional wide tight end. Maybe he's a weak side version of Mayer. He played 62% of his snaps in line his final year in college, 18% in the slot, another 17% out wide. Very productive his entire time in Iowa in the passing game. Not really anything to speak of at all as a blocker. The worst among the tight ends in the top 100 with a 53.1 blocking grade from Pro Football Focus his final season at Iowa. I think he profiles as a bit of a gadget guy. Maybe a Tonyan type who you move around a lot. There's really not any problems with him, and I've read some smart evaluators who I trust that think maybe the offense that he played in Iowa was the problem here, that he could have done some really interesting things, that he played in a more creative offense. I don't know enough about what Iowa does to say confidently, my opinion on that one way or another. But if that's the case, provided he lands in the right role in the NFL, I think you might have something here. If nothing else, you've got another pretty beefy guy who can move. That is something that you can work with. Finally, the final of the top 100 tight ends is Tucker Kraft out of South Dakota State. This is a tricky one because South Dakota State, not what we would call, major college football, but Kraft is a pretty good athlete. 6'4", nearly 6'5", 254 pounds, a 9.68 relative athletic score bolstered by a 4.69 40-yard dash. In college, Kraft was primarily an inline guy. His final year in college, he played just over 71% of his snaps inline, another 17% in the slot. Did move around into the backfield a little bit, nearly 4% of his snaps there. Quite productive in a small school football setting, and probably would have had even more impressive stats if he didn't miss 6 games due to injury in his final year at South Dakota State. As with all small school guys, I think you wonder a little bit about the projection. What can he do at the next level, even when he didn't always dominate in college? And he did at times dominate in college, but not always. How do you project that to the NFL? His blocking grade, just 69.6, and again, don't hang a whole lot on college blocking grades, but I wonder if he couldn't have been a little bit more dominant as an elite athlete playing at a smaller school. Why were you only that level of blocking grade, not more dominant, not in the Mayer or Washington school of things? I think that is a fair question. I don't have an answer for it, but I think that's something you do have to ask about a little bit. In terms of fun facts, doesn't get much more fun than this. And we got to circle back into a fact about Sam Laporta, too, because I got a good one about him. But Kraft played running back, linebacker, and punter in high school, in addition to moonlighting as a quarterback. He threw 5 touchdown passes as a part-time high school quarterback. And for a bonus stat, circling back to Sam Laporta, he had at least 14 interceptions playing defensive back in high school, too. It looks like he could have played on the other side of the ball. Now, there are some other interesting tight ends out there, a number of good prospects between 100 and 200 on the consensus big board, starting with Zach Kuntz out of Old Dominion. He's currently number 119, real big guy, 6'7", circling back to a really old school stat that we used to use for some of our tight end and wide receiver evaluations, height-adjusted speed score. That gives you a little bit more credit if you're running fast while you're big and tall as opposed to just beefy. Zach Kuntz at 6'7" and 255 pounds has the best height-adjusted speed score in the class among tight ends at a 133.5. Just for comparison, Darnell Washington, who's moving pretty good at 264 pounds, was just a 126. And Michael Mayer still cracks 100, so still a pretty good number, was just a 108, running a 4.7 at 249 pounds. But Kuntz can move. He is a really big slot guy. He's at 6'7". You would think, wow, you probably put on some weight. You play an inline position, but no, not in college. 47% of his snaps came in the slot, which is the most out of any of the tight ends, any of the 12 tight ends I've got on my list. That is a noteworthy outlier. Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan is number 130 on the consensus mock draft big board. He was never a big producer in the passing game. He also is going to turn 25 years old as a rookie, so an old rookie who is not particularly productive. He did, however, put up a 9.86 relative athletic score, ran a 4.63 40 at 251 pounds, so he moves pretty well. But on that age, courtesy of Dane Brugler at The Athletic, this nugget, check out why he's a little bit older than you would expect as a rookie. According to Brugler, Schoonmaker spent 5 years in high school after repeating his junior year because of mono and a lacerated spleen, which ruptured when he rushed back from mono. That's a bummer. Not only are you doing a year of high school twice, I don't know how that works out with athletic eligibility, but it probably messes with that too. And then you end up being 25 heading into the NFL. Brandon Strange out of Penn State, number 141. Here's a Josiah DeGuara type guy. Played all over the place. 49% in line, just under 50%, another 29% in the slot, 15% in the backfield, the most out of anybody in the class at the tight end position, or at least in the top 200. He can move all over the formation, just under 6'4", 253 pounds, only ran a 4.7 though. Josh Weil out of Cincinnati, Josiah DeGuara's alma mater, is number 159 on the big board. If you're looking for late round value, I think you could do worse with him than him. No major weak spots in his scouting report, just not really outstanding anywhere. He gained 20 pounds over the final couple of years he played in college, and I think you might want to have him play a little bit lighter. He was at the combine, he was 248. Apparently he was in the mid to high 250s his final year in college. If he's more comfortable playing in the high 230s, I think you just kind of make him into another version of Zach Kuntz and say, hey, just be a big slot guy. Shoot, Mike Gesicki did a lot of good things for the Miami Dolphins, even if he wasn't a great fit for the offense that they ended up running there as they changed coaches. But you can still make money as just basically a tall, big wide receiver. Maybe that ends up being Weil's game in the NFL. Cameron Latu out of Alabama is number 166 on the big board. Started his college career as a linebacker before moving to tight end. 56 career catches, 12 of them for touchdowns, including 8 in one season, an Alabama record for tight ends, just a 6.22 relative athletic score, though. And rounding out the top 200 prospects, the final tight end in that top 200 is Will Mallory out of Miami, the Florida version of Miami. Another mini Michael Mayer type, 6'4", 239 pounds. Played about two-thirds of his snaps his final season in college, in line, another 30% in the slot. He moves around a little bit too. The worst blocker, though, by far among the tight ends that we looked at today, a final year blocking grade of 36.6. Yikes. He is, however, the fastest tight end in the top 200 by 1/100th of a second. His 4.54 40-yard dash beats Zach Kuntz by 1/100th of a second. Kuntz ran a 4.55. Those are the tight ends. Again, I don't want to say like hard and fast, this is where the Packers should take this guy, and if they don't get this guy here, I don't think that is how this class is going to shake out. I think there's value throughout. I think probably sooner than later you want to take a guy just so you get one of those top 4 or 5 guys. But I think with just about everybody in this class is going to come down to finding the right role with the right team. I feel pretty confident that a guy like Darnell Washington is going to succeed just about anywhere he ends up. Michael Mayer is probably in that boat too. Those are probably my top 2 tight ends here. I think they project the best, even if Mayer is close to his ceiling as a player. But I think it is, again, really going to be dependent on these guys finding the right role with the right team. And as far as when the Packers take them, well, they're going to have an opportunity to play quite a bit, even as a rookie. Getting them integrated in whatever the Packers offense looks like is going to be, well, that's the next real question, isn't it? But that is a question for another day. We still got to actually get these guys picked, and, well, we got a little ways to go yet before that, but we're getting close. Thanks for sticking with us through the draft prep process. Thank you for your continued attention, and thank you for all of the good questions that we've gotten. We're going to try to answer some questions ahead of the draft next week, thinking about the draft and everything that goes into it. In the meantime, that's all I've got for you in this episode of Blue 58. I appreciate you tuning in. I'd appreciate it even more if you'd take a second and share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it. It's going to help more people find the show and get more people involved in this conversation you and I are having about the Green Bay Packers, which in turn is going to help all of us, me included, become smarter Packers fans. And as I always say, smarter Packers fans are better Packers fans, and better Packers fans are what we all want to be. I'm your host, John Meerdink. We'll see you next time on Blue 58.